Yo, what up? Peace to the royal family. This is another demonstration. In this video, we'll be talking about private banking real quick. Shout out to the kids. Let's see. See, Andrew Jackson, he violated public international law because he denied the creditor his just lien rights on the debtor. However, the bankers, they didn't lend value or any substance in actuality. They had an unperfected lien, so law actually did not apply. Andrew Jackson stated, controlling our currency, receiving our public money, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence would be more formidable and dangerous than a military power of the enemy. What's that? Yeah. It looked like it's getting, like you activated it. You want me to drive one? You can just drive that. I've been to like.
That's really right.
It's good. For any future date being designated. In 1860, the southern states, they walked out of Congress. That created sign die, which is without any further date being designated. Abraham Lincoln was elected president. The South walked out and declared their states' rights pursuant to the Constitution. Slavery was only a window dressing for the Civil War. The war had nothing to do with slavery. It had to do with the states' rights and national debt to the banks and the bankers. The South wanted to be redeemed from the crown in England. The North wanted to remain under their dominion and their debt. What it is. South wanted to be free. North wanted to be slaves. When the South walked out of Congress, that ended the public side of the bifurcated Constitution as far as the government was concerned. What remained of the government was the private side, the democracy, and under the rule of the bankers. During the Civil War, the new 13th Amendment was enacted December 8th, 1865. The 14th Amendment was enacted July 28th, 1868. The 15th Amendment enacted March 30th, 1870. Put some luck in the bowl plate.
Thank you.
I put some honey on those. I'm thinking it's smoke. President Lincoln, by executive order, proclaimed the first Trading with the Enemy Act. President Lincoln stated the government should create, issue, and circulate all currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. Further, he quoted, "The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest opportunity." Afterwards, Abraham Lincoln, he was murdered because he defied the bankers by printing interest-free money to pay for the war efforts. The 14th Amendment brought the free slaves whose previous owners were private plantations and transferred those slaves under slavery of the government to 10-mile square jurisdiction of Washington, D.C. At this period of time, the only people in the United States who were under the jurisdiction of the private bifurcated government of the 10-mile square D.C. of Washington, D.C., were the government employees, those within their territories owned by the United States, and now the former slaves. The former citizens of the South, now captured, became 14th Amendment citizens. The remainder of the people could still invoke the power over government through original jurisdiction of the Republic side of the Constitution. Thus, the government operated fully under the authority of private law dictated by the creditor. The United States incorporates in England. In 1871, the default again loomed and bankruptcy was imminent. So in 1871, the 10-mile square was incorporated in England. They used the Constitution as their bylaws, not as an authority under the Constitution, but as authority over the Constitution. They copyrighted not only the Constitution, but also many names such as, all caps, the United States, U.S., the United States of America, USA, and many other titles as their own. This is the final blow to the original Constitution. From here on out, the United States was governed entirely by private corporate law dictated by the banks as creditors. And that's how the banks became creditors. Then you have more bankruptcy reorganizations. In 1909, default loomed again. The U.S. government went to the Crown of England and asked for an extension of time. That extension was granted for another 20 years on several conditions. One of the conditions was that the United States allowed the creditors to establish a new national bank. This was done in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Bank. This is along with the 16th Amendment collection of income tax enacted February 25, 1913, and the 17th Amendment created May 31, 1913. Were the conditions for the extension of time. The 16th and 17th Amendment further reduced the state's power. The United States adopted the Babylonian system. Then that's when you had the First World War. In 1917, people began to be drafted into the First World War. First World War. In 1917, people were drafted into the First World War. The debt accumulated so that it became impossible for them to pay it off. In 1929, it also enhanced the War Powers Act that President Lincoln, by executive order, put in place during his presidency. This War Powers Act was reinforced and was the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. This becomes important later on. The Great Depression. We all know what happened in 1929. This was the year of the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. The stock market crash moved billions of dollars from the people to the banks. This also removed cash from circulation for the people's use. Removed cash from circulation for the people's use. Those who still possessed any cash invested in high interest yielding treasury bonds driven higher by increased demand. As a result, even more cash was removed from circulation for the general public to the point where there was not enough cash left in circulation to buy the goods being produced. Uh-oh. I see a Great Depression happening on, 2029. I mean, this happened in 1929. We're going through the same thing. Because look, they just gave you the whole thing. This is crypto right here. This is digital banking. The stock market crash moved billions of dollars from the people to the banks to the private, from the public to the private. That removed circulation for the people's use. They removed the cash from circulation for people to use. Those who possessed cash invested in the high yielding treasury bonds, or today, digital banking. The ones that are driven higher by increased demands, the crypto tokens. As a result, even more cash is going to be removed from the circulation for the general public to the point where there is not enough cash left in circulation to buy the goods being produced. So that's how the drought is created, is by removing enough currency out of circulation. So now there's not enough money for things to keep being produced. Thereby, there's more products on the market than there are cash to buy them. Prices plummet, and industries plunges into bankruptcy. So millions more people out of work and out of cash. Foreclosures on homes, foreclosures on factories, businesses, and farms rose to the highest level in the history of America. A mere dime was literally salvation to many families now living on the street. Millions of people lost everything they had, keeping only the clothes on their backs. Millions of people. Maybe we're going through it ahead of time. So 2029, we already have an initiative.
You like it?
Just think about that. Then in Europe, in 1930, the international bankers declared several nations bankrupt, including the United States. Then in 1933, President Roosevelt was elected and took office. His first act as president was to declare publicly the United States bankrupt. He further went on to issue his presidential executive order on March 5th, 1933. That all United States citizens must turn in all their gold in return for Federal Reserve notes. This was passed into law by Congress on June 5th, 1933. House Senate Joint Resolution 192, 1933. We the people turned in all the gold at the time. Why? Were they United States citizens? No, they were still sovereign people until that time. They just thought that they were required to turn in all the gold. Only those people living in Washington, D.C. and the 14th Amendment citizens were required to do so. They were still sovereign. They were not under the jurisdiction of the United States of America, which had been incorporated in 1871. When the gold was turned in, everyone just volunteered into the jurisdiction of the 10-mile square of the Washington, D.C. and their laws. They became 14th Amendment citizens. Their birth certificates, the title to their bodies were registered in the commercial registry. This title to your body, all of your property, and all of your future labor was pledged to the international bankers as security for the money owed in bankruptcy. This was done under the authority of commercial law, aka Babylonian law, and through title. The American people were not in bankruptcy, only the corporate United States was in bankruptcy. We must remember, however, that it was only the politicians and the 10-mile square of Washington, D.C., the United States corporation, that went into bankruptcy. It was not the American people. Unless you contract under the artificial entity. First, your birth certificate was voluntarily given by your mother to the state and then entered into the commercial registry for registration. Within the all capitalized United States when you were born, this, in commerce, gave title to your body by way of a constructive or other types of contract. Constructive contract. Now, all of us are now members of the Babylonian system in every manner. Next, the government created an artificial person, an organization, a fictitious entity, and what we call an artificial entity. By and through an adhesion contract, the government then made you, the real man or woman, responsible for and fiduciary for and surety for that artificial entity. This is how your artificial entity secured the national debt, and through it, you became a 14th Amendment citizen of the United States. What it was. First, your birth certificate was voluntarily given by your mother to the state and then entered into the commercial registry for registration within the United States when you were born. That in commerce gave your title to your body by way of a constructive contract. Now you became a member of that system. Now, an artificial person is also an organization, a fictitious entity. So you were titled a fictitious entity by and through an adhesion contract with your signature on that piece of paper. And then it made you the real man or woman responsible for and fiduciary for and surety for, responsible, fiduciary, and sure for that artificial entity. That's how you became a debtor. Let's move this real quick. All license and all existing contracts are made between the United States or the state of whatever state you live in and your artificial entity. That fictitious entity binds you to the United States because they have, through a Haitian contract, made you the real man or woman fiduciary responsible for that artificial entity. Of course, you voluntarily sign and even request all those contracts, don't you? Do you know? Do you realize that all of these contracts you sign carry with it your agreement to obey and uphold all the laws, rules, and regulations passed by the Congress of the United States Corporation and the state of whatever state you're in, and will be forced against you? This is how you become a subject to the artificial entity, the United States. From that day forward, we could never own property again because the state now had possession of all of it. In 1964, the state obtained title to our property. You can only rent out your homes that you believe you own. You only have a certificate of title to the car that you think you own. The state owns the true title to your homes and to your cars, to everything that you think that you own. You married the state through your marriage license, and your children became wards of the state as well through their school attendances. All of this was pledged, including all the fruits of our future labor, your future labor, to the bankers as security against the national debt, and was placed in the possession of the Secretary of State of each state as an agent for the trustee of the bankruptcy, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury. Back. This was further tightened up when everyone was made to apply for a social security number after 1935 by contract, which they hurriedly voluntarily entered into when the Social Security Act was signed into law. Then by many further contracts to be entered into and licensed to be applied for, all voluntary affairs. President Roosevelt then called all the governors into Washington, D.C. for a conference. This was the beginning of the states losing the remainder of their sovereignty. It was not until 1944 that the corporate states lost all their power over the corporate United States with the Black Act, the Buck Act. With this act, the states became essentially 14th Amendment citizens as well. This completed the destruction of the corporate states having any power to protect any against usurpation by the U.S. government. The corporate states went under the jurisdiction of Washington, D.C. Therefore, the movement toward a communistic dictatorship and one world government rapidly increased. The Bretton Woods Agreement, which created the United Nations in 1946, the adoption of the Uniform Commercial Code by all states in 1964, and a number of other like laws and acts were incorporated into this nation. This made the Uniform Commercial Code the supreme law of the land. Okay, let's look into the Bretton Woods Agreement. Let's look at that. Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 established a new global new global monetary system. It replaced the gold standard with the US dollar as a global currency. By doing so, it established America as a dominant power in the world economy. After that agreement was signed, America was the only country with the ability to print dollars. That agreement created the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. US-backed organizations that would monitor the new system. Let's go, dude. I'm reading about the Bretton Woods agreement. You should definitely Google Bretton Woods. It happened in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Let's go back, read it. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 established a new international monetary system. It replaced the gold standard with the US dollar as the global currency. By doing so, it established America as the dominant power in the world economy. After that agreement was signed, America was the only country with the ability to print dollars. Takeaways. The creation of Bretton Woods resulted in countries pegging their currencies to the US dollar. In turn, the dollar was pegged to the price of gold and the US became dominant in the world economy. Then the US was the only nation that could print the globally accepted currency, and countries had more flexibility than they did with the old gold standard. When the dollar ceased to be pegged to the price of gold, it became the monetary standard with other currencies pegging their currencies to it. Under the agreement, countries promised that their central banks would maintain fixed exchange rates between their currencies to the dollar. If a country's currency value became too weak relative to the dollar, the bank would buy up its currency in foreign exchange markets. If a country's currency value becomes too weak relative to the dollar, the banks buy up its currency in foreign exchange market. Write that one down. Let me write that one down. No pencil. It's all right. I'm gonna hop off here anyway. Purchasing currency will lower the supply of the currency and raise its price. If the currency's price became too high, the central bank would just print more. This printed production would increase the supply and lower the currency's price. Members of the Brentwood system agreed to avoid trade wars. For example, they wouldn't lower their currency strictly to increase trade, for they could regulate their currencies under certain conditions. For example, they could take action if foreign direct investment began to destabilize their economies. They could also adjust their currency values to rebuild after a war. What are trade wars and what is foreign direct investment? Foreign direct investment happens when an individual or business owns 10% or more of a foreign company. If an investor owns less than 10%, the International Monetary Fund defines it as part of their stock portfolio. A 10% ownership doesn't give the individual investor a controlling interest in the foreign company. However, it does allow influence over the company's management, operations, and policies. For this reason, governments track investments in their country and their country's businesses. So you want to own less than 10% of your business, essentially. Recent foreign direct investment trends. In 2020, the global foreign direct investment fell by 1/3 to $1 trillion due to the effects of the global COVID pandemic, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. That's far below 2016's peak level of foreign direct investment, which nearly hit $2 trillion. This is critical for developing emerging market countries. These companies need multinational funding and expertise to expand their international sales. The countries need private investment in infrastructure, yada, yada, yada. So that's what foreign direct investment is. Trade wars. Then I'm hopping off. A trade war occurs when a nation imposes tariffs or quotas on imports, taxes on imports, and foreign countries retaliate with similar forms of trade protectionism. As it escalates, a trade war reduces international trade. A trade war starts when a nation attempts to protect its domestic industry and create jobs. In the short run, it may work. Tariffs are intended to give a competitive advantage to domestic producers. As a result, they would receive more orders from local customers. As the businesses grow, they would add jobs. But in the long run, a trade war costs jobs. It depresses economic growth for all countries involved. It also triggers inflation when tariffs increase the prices of imports. All right, so I'm hopping off here for now. Reading about the Brentwood Project, which created the United Nations in 1946. The adoption of the Uniform Commercial Code by all the states in 1964, and a number of other laws and acts were incorporated into this nation. This made the Uniform Commercial Code the supreme law of the land. We lost courts in 1976. In 1976, Congress took away any semblance of law or justice left within our court system. All law today is now constructed, and made up by the judge as it happens before your very eyes. They took away any control or authority we might have had over the court system. See Senate Bill 94-204, which deals with the court system, and Senate Bill 94-381, dealing with public law. This has been very well hidden from all of us. Many of us going into court often wonder why and how the courts can simply override the laws we put into our paperwork. It's very simple. Now that we know how they do it, they operate on the words construe and construct. A simple word such as in changed to at, as in at law or in law, has a totally separate meaning. For example, if you are in the river, you are wet, you can swim, etc. But if you are at the river, you might enjoy a refreshing picnic, play baseball, or run races. See the difference a simple word can make. And the attorneys often change this word when they answer your motions, in addition to many others. It will pay you in dividends to read the answers of attorneys to your paperwork. Compare what they say, the case law says, to the actual case law itself. You will discover that they have actually changed the words therein. This is illegal, you might say. No, not according to the above Senate bills. Go look at them. Senate Bill 94-204 and Senate Bill 94-381. Matter of fact, I'll pull a little bit more real quick. I was going to hop off, but we need more of this so you can understand why trust and economics, currency, credit is so important. All right, let me go back to this. You see, they can construe and construct any law or statute to mean whatever they decide it to mean for their benefit. You don't know any of this. You think they are railroading you in a kangaroo court. No, they are legal in what they do. They usually follow the law to the letter. Their law, private law, the law of contract, that you know nothing about. This law is called contract law. Contracts. If you do not understand the above and realize what law you are dealing with when you go into court, you will lose. Even if you have filed your UCC-1 and have captured your title and your artificial entity, this makes no difference in the above courts. Why? They operate in total fiction in La La Land and the land of Oz. They can only recognize contracts, and you are a real sentient being, still, even with your numerous adhesion contracts that you have attached to you. Whatever you file in that court, whatever it is, your UCC-1 or law from the judicial and or original jurisdiction side, that is real, that lawful shit, the lawful truth, they do not recognize truth of any sort. They only recognize fiction and contract law. So when you go into any court, be aware that this is their law, that the judge or the prosecutor can construe and construct that law in any fashion they choose. It will always mean what they choose it to mean. They created it. So are the courts bound by the Constitution then, you ask? By the law? By statutes? No. Contracts only. And the statutes used to enforce those contracts. And when we use their statutes, Constitution, UCC rules and regulations, all the copyrighted, without a license from the bar, you are in violation of the copyright infringement, and punishment is mandatory. There is no law in this nation or the world for that matter. There is only contract law. So I'm going to summarize it. So in part, you can see throughout our entire Babylonian history of commerce and merchant law has followed wherever productive people go. The bankers are waiting in the wings when we founded this country. It was only 2 years after the Constitution was enacted that the bankers threw the people here into bankruptcy. The newly founded government, the newly founded government moved over to the side under the 10 square mile that Congress controls. today. In 1860, the Southern states walked out of Congress. This officially ended the lawful side of the Constitution. In 1871, the 10 Mile Square and its territories that Congress controlled was incorporated in England, and the Constitution was adopted as the bylaws of the corporation. That ended completely the Constitution. We no longer had a Constitution. The United States, as a corporation created in England, came under the jurisdiction of England. This entitled England to create laws as England saw fit to do. They established those laws in the United States, and everyone at the time was a 14th Amendment citizen, which subject to obey those laws. This also placed Congress of the United States above that portion of what we think is the Constitution, not under the authority of anything. The only Bill of Rights left at this point in time were the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendments. This is all that the courts are required to take cognizance. This is all that the courts have to take and recognize when it comes to you appearing in their courts. Then the merchants of Babylon, the bankers, moved deeper into our nation by the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913 and the IRS to collect the interest on their loans made to the United States. The 1929 stock market crash and the Great Depression that followed placed the American people in desperation, homelessness, poverty, and even starvation. The minds of the people were focused on survival. They were then in a condition to accept any handout given by the government, no matter what the cost to their freedoms. FDR treasonously placed this entire nation into socialism. We were drawn in as 14th Amendment citizens through the registration of our birth certificates. We were further enticed deeper into that system by volunteering for many other licenses and privileges given by the government. We were also made enemies of the United States. This act gave the United States authority under the laws of war and as a captured people to force anything on us they choose to create. Thereafter, we sank further into communism. If you read the 10 planks of communism, you will discover that this nation has fulfilled every plank successfully. We are a communistic nation. Then, in 1976, Congress removed any semblance of justice in our court system with the Senate Bill 94-201. and 94-381. From this point forward, the officers of the court can construe and construct the laws to mean anything they choose to mean. As 14th Amendment citizens, we are not citizens of the America KKK. We have always thought we are actually citizens of England through the corporation of the United States. So today, as in ancient Babylon, our idols of worship is money, i.e. Federal Reserve notes, which are graven images, both a fiction. There is no law today except fiction of copyrighted statutes to be interpreted by judges who construe and construct whatever they choose to have those statutes mean. Do you now have a different viewpoint on where you are actually are now from where you thought before you began? Listen to me. Shit. I'm done, y'all. I ain't gonna talk your head off. I ain't gonna go into that. I just went to the history. Next time I come on here, I'll give you a bird's eye view. You already know. Golden ratio. Make sure y'all share these videos and continue tapping in this Infinitesteveee, the Royal Minister. Out.